Hi everybody, Amy Copeland here with a cute happy birthday scene card featuring Lawn Fawn's adorable Be Happy stamp set. I've created a couple mini peas using shrink plastic. I've sped up the entire video to about 4 times fast except for the part where I do the shrink plastic. I started out by using Lawn Fawn's Say Cheese Again die set, and I cut it first out of white cardstock and then again out of moonstone cardstock and then again out of noble fir. All of these are by Lawn Fawn. And then I'm going to use the mushroom border die, the grassy piece, to cut little grassy sections out of the noble fir cardstock. After I cut the grassy pieces out, then I use My Favorite Things mini cloud stencil and the Amazon makeup brushes to ink blend moonstone ink onto the moonstone cardstock for a cloudy effect. And then I ink blended noble fir ink onto the noble fir cardstock just at the top of the grass for a little bit of extra dimension. I said it in my last video and I'll say it again. I love these ink blending brushes. I get such a smooth blend, even using dye inks onto regular cardstock. I don't think I showed it in the video, but after I have ink blended the components of the sky and the grass, I used liquid glue to glue the grass onto the sky piece, and then I just used regular Scotch tape on the back of the Say Cheese frame to tape my moonstone cardstock in place. Here I'm using my Misty to stamp a couple peas, the pea pod, the speech bubble, and then the cake from Elfie Selfie with jet black ink. I stamped each component a couple times, and then I'm going to use Copic markers for coloring. I showed the colors, but since I sped up the video you can't really tell. I used YG03 and YG06 for the peas. For the pea pod, I used G24, G94, and G99. For the base of the cake, I used E30 and E31. For the icing, I used R20, R21, and R22. For the candles, I used BG13 and BG18. And for the flames, I used Y13 and Y17. And then put a coating of Spectrum Noir's clear overlay sparkle pen and a layer of glossy accents. I applied the glossy accents to the candles as well. I sped up the coloring because I'm not an awesome Copic colorist. It's pretty basic coloring, and you can still see what I'm doing. I should mention that I did not apply the Spectrum Noir or the glossy accents until after I die cut the pieces. And for the party hat on the little pea, I used the same colors that I used for the icing and the candles, except I think I only chose 2 colors for each stripe because they're so tiny. Normally I stamp the faces on the peas before I color, but I forgot. So I will stamp that after I do the coloring. You'll see me do that. I also forgot to mention, if you don't like watching people color, you can skip ahead to about 6 minutes in And that's when I start to stamp the faces with the Misty. You'll see me when I get to that point kind of struggling um, to get my faces in the perfect position. And what I learned as I was doing it is when you're stamping multiple faces, once you get one in place, close the door of the Misty or stamp positioner that you're using so that you pick up the stamp that's already in good alignment before you put another one down, because I bumped the first one that I had spent a while getting in the right position and had to do that over. Almost finished coloring. Looks like on the hat stripes I used B13 and B18, the same colors as the candles, and then I used R20 and R22 for the pink stripes. I love these little faces that you can put on the peas. I think it just bumps up the cuteness factor. And I love that there are so many choices you can pick from in this set. Every time I use this set, I have to use the little face with the glasses. In this case, I used it on one of my mini peas, and it's so adorable. Still fiddling, trying to line up. And there's the third face. And I'm stamping all of the faces with Fawn jet black ink. I stamp each face a couple times. And you can see on that pea on the left, I pressed a little too hard, and the eyes got bigger than they should have. So I re-stamped that pea, and I'm re-stamping that face, and then I'll just color that in really quick. I don't think I show that on camera with me coloring it in, but if I do, I'm sorry. Yep, I show it. Sorry. Then I'll line up my coordinating dies and attach them to the cardstock with post-it tape and run them through my die cut machine. I have to do the peas a couple times. And you can see I leave the speech bubble there because I hadn't decided yet what color ink I was going to be using for the little sentiment that I would put in the speech bubble. I ended up using Yippee. I love the puns in this set. I love the way the little die cuts look when you pop them out of the die. And now I'm going to add the accents to my cake with the Spectrum Noir clear overlay and the glossy accents. The camera doesn't really pick it up, but in person it gives it a nice little accent. And I just took a little scrap of post-it tape there and put glossy accents on it to make sure I didn't have any air bubbles when I first started. Now we're getting to the shrink plastic. I use Shrinky Dinks Bright White shrink plastic. I got it from Michael's. And that little block that you saw there was a sanding block. It's a really smooth surface, and so you need to sand the top off to give it a little bit of tooth, per se, for your coloring medium to stick to. I stamped the plastic after I had it sanded, and I wiped off the powder that was left behind after stamping, or sanding rather, sorry. And then I used Lawn Fawn jet black ink to stamp my peas with my Misty. I found through trial and error that really the best way to color this is to stamp with StazOn ink and then color with colored pencils. But the jet black worked okay. I just dabbed it with my finger after stamping to get the really wet layer off. And then I waited to stamp my faces, this time on purpose, so that I could color with the Copic marker inside the lines, because I found if I touched it to the black lines, even though it's Copic friendly ink, it still smeared. Here's where I get to real time. I just have a little ramekin there and a wooden handled stylus, and I'm just lightly applying pressure to the back side of the Shrinky Dink and using my heat tool, and you'll see it start to curl up, and when it flattens, it's done. Here's the second one. I wanted you to see how long it took, which is why I kept it in real time. And I did a couple of them off camera. Now I'm going to start building my scenes on the little Polaroid frames. First, before I start gluing anything down, I'm going to stamp my sentiments. And I use Fawn Wild Rose ink to stamp Happy Birthday on the bigger frame. And then on the smaller frame, in that same Wild Rose ink, I stamp From All of Us. And that's also what I use to stamp the little speech bubble with Yippee, is that Wild Rose ink. And then I'll die cut that out. And I'll start adhering everything to my little scene bases. I've been using the Tonic Nuvo Deluxe Adhesive. I like that it gives you a little bit of wiggle room. But I also got the Lawn Fawn glue tube recently. I haven't tried that yet, but I've heard it's awesome. And then when it gets to be time to adhere the tiny little peas, you'll see I use that sanding block that I used to sand the Shrinky Dink plastic originally to sand the back of the mini piece, and then I use score tape in an 1/8 inch width to adhere my little piece onto my card. Here I am using that YG03 Copic marker just to smooth out the color. Just use the sanding block there, and I'm cutting a tiny little piece of the score tape, removing the back of the adhesive, the liner, and sticking that down. I had to make this card twice because right around the time it was time to create my scenes, I found out my camera battery had died. So this stuff here is round 2. That's the Spiffy Speckles 6x6 Petite Paper Pack by Lawn Fawn, and I chose the pink pattern, and I used my large stitched rectangle stackables die. I've used it hundreds of times I use it for almost every card that I make. And then I'm going to adhere the scenes onto the card base with foam tape. The first couple I cut, and then I started tearing it. And you'll see in the finished card photo, on my first card, I actually cut off that little snip of the frame that was hanging off, which I think was a mistake. So on the second attempt, I left it as is. On that smaller frame, I used foam adhesive on the bottom and on the right side, and then liquid glue in the middle. And then I'm creating a card base from Nina 110-pound classic crest cardstock. It's A2 sized, 4¼ by 5½. And then I glue my card panel onto the card base and the card's finished. Thank you so much for watching, and I would greatly appreciate a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you enjoyed this project. I hope you have an awesome day. Bye.